The first troubleshooting topic I want to cover is what to do in the event that your base station freezes, either before the game on the boot up or more importantly during the game. Obviously, if it happens during the boot up or say before the game, you notice that the touchscreen freezes when you attempt to calibrate the belt packs, for example, we're going to go ahead and reboot the base station. So this flow chart kind of goes over how to prioritize the appropriate action if this happens during the game. So if you notice the touchscreen has frozen, the first thing we want to assess is, does the base station control the game clock? So in other words, do the start and stop buttons on the base station still start and stop the game clock? So if this is the case, this gives us more options as to when to actually intervene and possibly reboot the base station. Obviously, if all functionality is lost, we're going to take the base station offline and try to proceed with the reboot procedure as soon as possible. If the base station is still operating the game clock, then we can go ahead and assess, are the belt packs still working? So sometimes, even though the touchscreen is not showing any changes, the belt packs are still starting and stopping the clock, and that's the way we designed the system. So if the belt packs are still working, that gives us a lot more flexibility as to when to engage in the reboot. And the reason I say this is that a hard reboot that includes restarting the base station and re-entering the game information will take about 2 minutes, which is pretty much the length of a full media timeout if we're doing a Division I game. An important point to know is that you do not have to recalibrate the belt packs after a hard reboot. Okay, so we just want to get the game reset up and continue playing. So if the decision is made to proceed with a hard reboot, the very first step is to pull the power from the back of the base station. And at this point, if the screen goes off, then just go ahead and reapply power and try to restart. But in this case, as you see here, the screen has stayed frozen in the Precision Time splash screen. So the second step is to locate the reset button, which would be on the right side of the base station. It is important not to use a pen or any other object to try to depress the reset button, as this could snap the rod, and then we're pretty much unable to proceed with the reset. Hold the reset button down. You'll feel a slight click, and hold it down until the screen flashes, and then release. At this point, the screen will probably go through a cycle down that will take about 20 seconds to complete, and then you should see the screen to go completely blank. At this point, then, you can reapply power and start over with the power on procedure and reset up the game. And as I mentioned, if you're doing this during the game, the original calibrations are saved, so you do not have to go through the recalibration procedure to bring the base station back online. Another scenario that occurs occasionally is the belt packs going offline or losing connectivity with the base station during a game. And this shows up on the main touchscreen as the green battery indicator or the radio signal strength indicator going offline. The first step to try, which is completely unobtrusive to the game and can be done during live play, is to simply hit the radio reset icon on the right-hand side of the touchscreen. And this may reset the connection and bring the belt packs online. So in this example, you see here we have the 3 belt packs that have gone offline. So we tap the radio reset icon, and you'll notice that shortly after we do this, the belt packs are reacquired and reappear as being connected on the touchscreen as shown. So if this does not address the issue, and depending on whether you detect this issue before the game or during the game, we have a couple of options. We can either, one, try to turn off and back on the referee belt packs, which is kind of like a reboot for those packs. Or, especially if this happens pre-game and you have time, we probably recommend that you go ahead and reboot the base station, and that would probably be a more solid fix for the issue moving forward. An issue you may encounter when doing your initial setup of your precision time equipment is you may find that when you get everything connected that the clock is actually toggling backwards. So in other words, the green button, which is clock run, is stopping the clock, and the red button is running the clock. We cover this in more detail in our clock configuration video, but just remember that this is an easy fix. If we go into the settings mode and then toggle the SSR 4 and 5 switches to on, as shown here in the split screen, and that will generally address the problem and get the clock running in the right direction. Be prepared, especially if we have determined that you need a relay box to properly interface with your scoreboard, that you will probably run into this situation when you go to set up your equipment the first time. If upon your setup of your base station you notice that you're not seeing clock data in the touchscreen, we can go through this following checklist. The first thing is to go into the clock configuration mode and make sure that we have the correct clock setting for your scoreboard. Please note at this time in the United States, only Daktronics, OES, Whiteway, and the NBA TISO scoring system is supported with the clock data. The next thing to check is to make sure that you have the data port plugged into the COM1 port and not mistakenly into port 2, since they're both DB9 ports. Also check and make sure that you either add or remove the null modem adapter as needed. In general, Daktronics requires this adapter and OES does not. If you're still not seeing clock data, the next step is to remove any other connections that might be part of that data flow. So either the DV Sports side or say a stats computer that might be sharing that Y cable that we provide. And that may identify if there's any backfeed coming from that equipment, and then you can address it on that side. These last two sections cover some specific topics to the Daktronics scoring system. Occasionally you may find that the clock is not responding consistently, or you may find that the horn button is not working. The first thing is to check and make sure that the RJ11 connectors are properly seated, especially on the all-sport controller side. As you know, these connectors get a lot of use and can get worn down very easily. The next thing you want to check for is to make sure that the tabs on the cable, the RJ11 connectors, are intact and not broken off, because those help the connector snap into place and seat that connection. So if your tabs are broken, you can go ahead and send that cable in and we can replace those tabs for you. We often recommend that our Daktronics customers have an extra cable or two on hand in the event that that happens. If the horn button is not working but everything else is, you may want to check and make sure that you're using a 6-pin RJ11 connector. A 4-pin connector will actually work as far as supporting the clock start and stop, but it's those last two pins are required to support the horn function. And one more trick that we have found to be useful is sometimes just switching the two ends of the Daktronic cable. So in other words, take the end that was plugged into PTS and put it in the All-Sport and vice versa. And that may just help reseat the connections better, but sometimes we have found that that works as well. One other issue that we've experienced with interfacing with Daktronics scoreboards is what we have coined in-house as the floating ground issue. And so basically what happens is you go to plug in your base station using a direct connect, and you'll notice that the scoreboard controller starts beeping constantly and stays in run mode. So here we try to simulate what you may experience if you have a severe floating ground issue where you see the green light flashing and hear the beeping of the controller. A less severe version of this floating ground issue is if you notice that every once in a while with the clock stop, you might hear a beep of the controller, or if you're under a minute, you'll notice that a tenth of a second randomly comes off the clock. The floating ground issue is actually caused by a bad cable somewhere in the Daktronics setup. Especially for arenas that do a lot of strikes and resetting up of their basketball setup, these cables can get damaged over time. If you are setting up for a game and experience this phenomenon for the first time, the immediate fix is to try to isolate the bad cable. Especially if you are supporting the clocks over the baskets by plugging them directly into the back of the All-Sport controller, you may want to start by unplugging one of those cables one at a time and see if that addresses the issue, and then you can fix that damaged cable. A more permanent solution to your floating ground issue would be to contact us, and we can send you a Precision Time relay box which will isolate the base station electrically from the rest of the Daktronics scoring system. Please note that this will not fix, however, any damaged cable issues that you have within your Daktronics scoring system. We recommend that you do a preseason setup and test so we can identify any of these issues well in advance of your first game. For any additional questions about the contents of this presentation, please use the contact information shown above. We thank you again for your support of Precision Time.